Alright, so let's talk about location real fast. So I just wanted to show you guys where I'm going to be putting my utility tub. Of course, it's going to be outdoors. It is in my backyard. And so this part of my backyard in my house, I have my garage back door, which leads over to my faucet, outdoor faucet, this is the only location for me. And then I have an air conditioning unit here. And so where I want to put my utility tub is right here for a couple of reasons. One, it's out of the way, and then two, I do have a sewer clean out, which I'm gonna kind of modify. I might show a video on that, on adding where I could essentially route my drain to that sewer clean out, or I could just route it to a bucket. And I'm going to be redoing all this because I do have some gardening timers and stuff like that, and I just don't like the layout. I'm constantly bent over and I'm just breaking my back, and that was one of the reasons for putting the utility tub right here, is that I have a wash station for any and every project that I'm doing, or vegetables when I bring them in from the garden, stuff like that. All right, let's talk about some of the hardware and tools that you're going to need. First off, your mounting bracket, which comes with my tub. Here is another one. Your instructions, plumbing, an electric drill if you're going to be drilling through grout or the mortar on a brick wall. I do suggest a hammer drill if you are going to go through the brick, because it's a lot harder, or something such as concrete. And an impact drill, if you don't have that for tightening the hardware, you can just use a ratchet. That just makes it a little bit quicker. Tape, level, something to mark with. Hole saw for cutting a hole in your utility sink if you don't already have a pre-cut hole. Tape measure. Your drill bits, if you are going to use a hammer drill, you're going to need like an SDS bit. And then this is a masonry bit that you can use on just a typical electric drill here. We'll talk about that later. A screwdriver, your mounting hardware. You don't necessarily have to have this, but some construction adhesive. Now that I've selected my location, I want to talk to you about mounting height. My kitchen sink is 36 inches, and that's a comfortable height, so that's what I determined the height I want my utility sink to be placed at. You want to be sure that you measure from the ground location, essentially where you're going to be standing. For my example, you would not measure from this lower part of the brick where it meets the foundation. As you can see here, 36 inches is right below that grout line. So I'm going to go ahead and move mine up to that next grout line. Since I'm a little bit taller, that's not going to bother me any. So next we want to find center. For me, it's going to be between this window and this outlet. So if I measure over, I'm right around 22 inches, and I'm gonna mark from my edge of my brick here 11 inches over, and I'm gonna place a center line. Okay guys, so I want to show you how I centered and leveled my mounting bracket. I bring my mounting bracket up and I centered the center hole off of my marked piece of tape. Centered this hole with the center of the grout, and then I taped it. I put a level on top, and I brought this side up to where it's level, taped that, and then I added 2 more pieces of tape just to secure it while I marked the center of each hole. Okay, so I wanted to show you guys how I get my hole started. Sometimes when you drill grout, you can the bit can walk a little bit on you, and so I'm gonna try to make some pilot holes, which I'm gonna use a screwdriver that I don't care a whole lot about, and go ahead and try to center these holes up. Okay, so let's talk mounting hardware. This tub came with its own mounting hardware, which you see here. I believe this is a 5/16 lag screw, and then it comes with a wall anchor. So you would just use the lag screws if you're going into a stud, a wood stud. And then for me, since I'm going into a masonry wall, then you would also use the wall anchor. You get 4 of these. 2 for the top mounting bracket and 2 for the bottom. As you saw, I did drill more holes, and the purpose of that is because just to be safe, I'm going to add some additional screws, lag screws. This is a 1/4 inch, 2 1/4 inch length Tapcon masonry screws, and I'm going to add this to my top mounting bracket because it has additional holes that I can use just to be on the safe side. So I'm going to go ahead and add 6 more screws, which is probably overkill, but I'd rather be on the safe side. Alright, so I wanted to show you guys why I picked 2¼ inch length for my Tapcon, because as you can see with my brick, the depth is not any more than the depth of my brick, so I don't have to worry about it penetrating through the other side. Okay, I also wanted to show that the wall anchor uses a 3/8 masonry bit, and then the Tapcon calls out for a 3/16. So for my wall anchor, I'm gonna switch from like a regular masonry drill bit that you see here that just attaches to a typical electric drill, and I'm going to a SDS masonry drill bit so that I can use my hammer drill here. Now the 3/16 masonry bit, I'm gonna go ahead and use my electric drill. For grout, at least my grout, it's fairly easy to penetrate, so I don't have a SDS 3/16 masonry bit. So I'm gonna go ahead and just use my electric drill. Okay, so I wanted to show you how I drilled my hole patterns. I did 3/16 here, 3/8, 3/16, 3/16. So 3/16 is gonna be for the Tapcon, and the 3/8 is gonna be for the wall anchor. So after you drill your holes, be sure you clean them out with some compressed air. So some of you may be wondering is, why did I choose my mortar or grout line over my brick? A couple of things. The brick is going to be a lot harder than actual grout, which means that when I drill, it's going to be a lot easier to drill into the grout line. If I'm going to drill into the brick, I'm going to need a hammer drill, and some people don't have those, and you can get away with drilling into your grout with just like a standard electric drill, as long as you're not doing too big of a hole, and you're not pushing too hard. You just don't want to damage your electric drill just because it's not meant for that. If I do ever decide to move this sink, I feel like cosmetically the holes in the mortar line or the grout line are a little more appealing than holes in the actual brick. Plus I could come back and re-seal these and you would probably never even know that they were there. Okay, so on the holes that accept the wall anchor, I'm gonna go ahead and put in a little bit of construction adhesive just to help with it being a little more secure inside of the hole. So I also went ahead and put some construction adhesive on the outside of the wall anchor. So next you want to set your wall anchor and go ahead and start tapping it in. Just to be sure that the hole is not full of construction adhesive, I'm going to go ahead and clean it out with this coat hanger. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is put my mounting bracket on. I'm going to start with my larger lag screw, tighten it up. And I don't want to go too far because this wall is not exactly flush and this bracket doesn't sit perfectly flat against it, and I don't want to crack the plastic. So I'm going to go ahead and run it the rest of the way in with a ratchet. So lastly, I'm going to install my Tapcon masonry screws to finish the mounting. So next I'm going to install these side mounting plates. Next you want to mount your utility sink. So to be sure that I'm center, I went ahead and marked a center line on the wall and on the tub. Before you mount your bottom bracket, be sure that you have your hole drilled for your faucet. I'm going to pull mine off and do that. We're going to go ahead and drill and mount the faucet. This is the faucet that I'm going to be using. It's just a cold water faucet. I actually got this off of a fish cleaning table, so I'm just going to repurpose it. And it comes with this coupler. So for my coupler, I'm going to have to cut an 1.8" hole. If you're going to go ahead and add a sprayer to your sink, be sure to cut that hole now. Now you can go ahead and mount your faucet. So just to review, I have my hole for my faucet, That attaches to a 3-way quick disconnect setup. It feeds over to a sprayer and hose, and then my water connection will be right here. So I'm going to attach a flexible drain pipe to the bottom. The sink came with the collar and the gasket for it. Actually, I already had this, but you'll have to purchase. Let's talk about how you're going to do your plumbing to your utility sink. First thing I recommend is to do a drawing, just a hand sketch like you see here. Here's another example of a rough sketch I did. And you're going to use this to figure out your path, design in any additional components that you may want, like timers or hose connections, and also to get a supplies list so that when you go buy what you need, you have everything. You don't have to go back and forth. So here's the final layout for the plumbing of my utility sink. First thing you want to do is lay out the components in your area that you're going to be hooking up your plumbing. Here's a window. Here's where I installed my utility sink, a sewer clean out, my electrical outlet, my AC outdoor unit, and a hose spool that I'm going to be moving from here to here. Next, you want to identify all the points of water connection. For example, here's my utility sink water connection. This is my outdoor water supply spigot. These are going to be hose connections for my timers that run an irrigation system throughout my yard and my garden. And then this over here is where I'm going to tie in additional hose. Now that you've identified your points of connection, now you want to draw in essentially your pipe or your lines. So first you're going to draw your line from your water source to your utility sink. Now some of you, this may be your only water connection, but for me, I have additional. It's really simple. You're going to connect to the hose spigot with a female hose thread. Then I'm going to have a backflow preventer and a pressure regulator. You come down here. If you have one line, you're just going to 90 over. This is going to be a shut-off valve. And then you're going to 90 up. And then for me, because mine has a T connection, it's going to 90 back into the faucet. So one of the things I wanted to accomplish was in the winter, I wanted things to self-drain. That's why you see a slope at the furthest connection here going all the way down and to a T and essentially a ball valve right here that I can open. So I'll turn off the water, open all my valves, and then open this valve, and the water will back drain down out. It'll back drain here. This will be sloped back out to this point, and this will back drain out. In addition to this, in the winter, I pressure my irrigation lines with air to essentially try to purge them of water so that things don't freeze and bust. So I have two hose timers. One's for my garden and one is for my trees. I have a third port here so that I can connect my air, back pressure these lines by closing this valve and forcing any additional water that's in those lines out. So one of the things I wanted to talk about is the placement of your valves for isolation. This is really important because this will kind of dictate how you use your piping system. First thing you want to do is put valves so that you can isolate each water supply. For example, there's a valve here to isolate this hose, valve on each of these connections, and then a valve here for my utility tub. Next, you want to add your valves so that you have the ability to isolate and move water where you want to. For example, in the winter, I don't use this side of my piping system. I'm really just going to use my outdoor sink because I'm not gardening and I'm not needing to water my trees or my garden. I want a isolation valve here to isolate this side of the piping system. The other valve that I'm going to put in is this valve for drainage. You may not have this in your system, but I'm going to try to gravity drain my system. Lastly, I'm going to make sure I have all the valving so that when I air pressurize my irrigation system, I don't backfeed any of the air into any of these other components. So for example, I will connect my air here. This will force air back and down these two irrigation lines, but I don't want this air to really go back over here. So I can close this isolation valve here, and I can close this isolation valve and essentially isolate these two timers by themselves. So lastly, once you figure out your points of connection and how this is going to be laid out, do a fitting count. And so let's take this area for example. I will have a male hose thread connection here, so I can connect to my garden hose. Then I will have a ball valve so that I can isolate this area. And then coming down, I'll have my pipe into another 90 connection, pipe back over to a T connection, and then if I continue along here, I have another ball valve for isolation, a T connection, my backflow preventer, and a pressure regulator, and then a female hose thread connection. So now that you have all your connections, valves, and devices drawn in, you can go ahead and make a shopping list so that when you go to purchase everything, you know that you've identified each component within the system. So I want to show you two modifications that I made on my piping system that I've showed you so far. First, I moved my pressure reducing valve from my main water supply and moving it to both my timer outlets. The reason being is that I don't need reduced pressure at my faucet in my hose location. I need a reduced pressure at my irrigation system. The reason for that is because some of the devices that you use to emit water are only rated for a certain amount of pressure, and you don't want to over pressurize them or you'll ruin them. So the second thing I want to talk to you about is filtration. Some of you may be asking, well, if I'm just running a utility sink, do I need filtration? In my opinion, no. And the reason being is that in a typical home, you don't have a filtration system added to like your kitchen or bathroom sink. The reason I have a filter being added on this line here is because, again, with my irrigation system, there are certain emitters have really small orifices, and so those can get plugged very easily. So it's best that you add a filter to your system, your irrigation system, to prevent those water emitters to be plugged up. So this is going to be the fitting layout for running from my water supply to my utility sink. First, I'm going to connect to my water supply with a backflow preventer, a female hose thread, into a 90 because the spigot comes out from the wall at an angle, so I have to angle back towards the wall. Then I'm going into this T connection. This way is to my timers and hose. This is my shutoff valve, another T into a valve for draining the water out of my system, back into a 90 to get at the right angle to connect to the utility sink. So before you fully attach your sink on the wall by mounting your bottom screws here, be sure that you make your water connection so that you're not having to crawl up under the sink. Now you want to make your connection from this 90 to your hose, and be sure you have a long enough piece to run all the way down the bottom and out. With your tub hanging on the wall, be sure you mark the holes for your two bottom brackets. So on the bottom mounting holes, I decided to go ahead and use the 1/4 inch Tapcon because the 5/16 lag I think is just a little oversized. Majority of your weight is going to be carried, I'd say 90% is going to be carried by the top mounting bracket, and so really the bottom is just to kind of keep the tub secured. And that kind of that side-to-side movement. So next I'm going to connect to my water supply and go down to my T, and that way I know the beginning height because I'm going to pitch my pipe downward towards my utility sink. So I've added this video because months after installing this, I had an issue with the lines coming apart. So this valve has barbed ends that slides into the tube. What I've noticed is that under pressure and heat, when I leave my water on, the line comes disconnected and literally water's pouring everywhere. So not a good situation. So what I should have done, and what you need to do, is install clamps here and here on both ends of the valve. So what I decided to use is this 3/8 to 7/8 hose clamps. They're stainless steel. So this is what it should look like: a clamp here and a clamp here. And what I did is I alternated the sides of the heads. So I have this head on this side and then this head on this side, because when I turn the valve, there won't be any interference with this coming in contact. Go ahead and repeat this for all the valves in your system. As you can see, about every 4 bricks in horizontal run, I lose 1 brick in vertical height. Now that you've made your connection from your water supply, you want to go ahead and mark where the beginning height of that pipe is, at least for me, because I'm going to pitch this line so that it self-drains. So this is where it starts, this is where I want it to end, and so I know roughly in this area, this is where my connections to my faucet is going to be made. Here's the mounting clamp and hardware that I'm using for the water pipe or tubing. So the mounting clamp is made by SharkBite, and it's a plastic clamp that's used for 3/4 inch PEX tubing. And I'm using it because in my example, it fits the poly tubing or pipe that I'm using from Dig. And it's not a tight fit because I want the pipe to be able to move or grow whenever it heats up. Because that's just what happens with this poly pipe, is that it will expand when under sunlight or heat. I made a modification to my mounting clamp by adding a concrete anchor screw here. And the reason I did that was because this comes with a nail that's typically driven into a stud, so something wood. And yes, I did try to mount it into concrete, but it didn't work so well. In some cases it did, but half the time it failed. So I pulled out that metal nail and I inserted a Tapcon 3/16 by 2 1/4 screw. This is the layout for the final run of fittings to hook up my irrigation system and my garden hose. So we already connected our utility tub from the main water supply here, going this way. Now we're going to continue off the T. I put in a ball valve, which I'm not showing here, but I already installed. That goes over to the T, that goes up to my irrigation manifold, and then goes this way to the garden hose. So the way I did the manifold is I'm going to have a T with a shut-off valve and a male hose thread. So the first thing to do is to continue from the ball valve here, the piping incline all the way to this 90, so that I have a continual decrease going this way to my drain that's at this end. So in order to keep the decline that I'm using for drainage, I've tied a string here and pulled it tight all the way across to my furthest point before it ends and goes up to the garden hose. So I've done a quick mock-up for my drip irrigation manifold to know that I have the spacing correct. For example, down here, I want to be far enough over with my pipe so that when I come up, I have enough spacing across the top so I don't run into this electrical disconnect right here. After coming up, my next connection is not going to be at the first 90 here. What I want to do is connect this manifold here together first, and then make the final connection at this line coming up. And the reason for that is because I want my grout line to be my point of connection here. So I want to make sure that I'm in line with my grout line, and then I'll make my final connection. This is how I did my manifold. A quick way to do this is to measure out your total length, lay out your pattern, and then eyeball the spacing in between. The first thing you want to do is measure your total length. Now I put down a piece of tape and marked out 24 inches on it. I put both of my 90s on each end, and this gave me the space in between. The space in between measured 19 inches. The two T connections together measure 7.75 inches. This gives me the remaining space that I have to divide up. So if I take 19 inches minus 7.75 and then I divide that by 3, that gives me my spacing. If you measure 3.75 from the inside end of each 90, then that gives you the starting point of your T connection. This should leave you with 3.75 in the middle between the two T connections. Here's the manifold that I went ahead and did a temporary setup. So coming from my line off the bottom, this will come up, connect to the 90, and I'm gonna go ahead and mount this first and make my final connection. So before I rigidly mount this pipe, I'm gonna go ahead and add my filter in here as I showed on the diagram. Here's my final manifold setup. Over here I've got my filter, my drip irrigation for my trees, my drip irrigation for my vegetable garden, and always add another hose connection because you never know when you'll need it. So I've added this video because months after installing this, I had an issue with the lines coming apart. So this valve has barbed ends that slides into the tube. What I've noticed is that under pressure and heat, when I leave my water on, the line comes disconnected and literally water's pouring everywhere. So not a good situation. So what I should have done and what you need to do is install clamps here and here on both ends of the valve. So what I decided to use is this 3/8 to 7/8 hose clamps. They're stainless steel. So this is what it should look like, a clamp here and a clamp here. And what I did is I alternated the sides of the heads. So I have this head on this side and then this head on this side, because when I turn the valve, there won't be any interference with this coming in contact. Go ahead and repeat this for all the valves in your system. Here is the final setup for my utility sink. As you can see over here, I have my shut-off valve, comes down to my drain line. And then in my utility sink, I've got my faucet with my hose sprayer, a stopper, a little bit of soap, and on the bottom, I have my drain with the bucket. So if I want to reuse that water, or I could just dump it straight to my septic. I love this outdoor utility sink. Guys, if you're a gardener, you have to get you a sink. Whether it's a utility sink, a stainless sink, but an outdoor sink is going to be a huge help for your garden. So a couple things I wanted to show you. Here's my air clean out valve. It's a hose thread valve connected to a couple brass fittings, and it connects to an airline hose connector. So with my prior piping system, this timer would turn off really fast, and that would create a knocking or banging noise, i.e. water hammer, and I could hear this inside the house. So I installed this arrestor, but with this piping system, I'm not sure if I'm going to do that because I don't know if the way my piping is now, if I'll have the same effect with my timers. So this kit comes with a 5/32 masonry bit. Now when I used it on my grout, it seemed to cut the hole a little too big. So when I installed the screw just seemed a little loose. Now on concrete, which is a lot harder, it probably works perfect. So I went in, I had an additional set of masonry bits, and I picked this one up here, which is actually 5/32 also. The thing is that this head is actually a smaller OD, and it cut a smaller hole that was perfect for mounting my masonry screw. So many of you are probably thinking what I had before. This is it. This is a manifold that you can buy at a big box store. So there's a couple things I didn't like about this. One, everything has to connect below this, which my spigot is pretty low, and everything just felt really cramped. The other thing is that I constantly had to bend over to turn things on and off, and I just didn't like the ergonomics of it. So the other thing I didn't like was that I knew that there was a better way to do this. I needed more ports, and I didn't want as much congestion, so that's when I came up with this project idea. Hope this helped you guys, and I look forward to doing more videos.